Hi, welcome to season 7, episode 5 of The Dark Side of Marketing. I'm Mary Abazia, and with me is Tom Spitali and Sean Wellham.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. We're with Impact Planning Group, and we're fascinated with this topic because we see that there's so many different ingredients that make marketing great or not so great. And so we have been delving into great examples to share with you and kind of look at it from all angles. This week, we're talking about propaganda. And Sean, I think my biggest question is, how is propaganda different than marketing or advertising?
Well, at one level, it's not different at all. Propaganda, if you like, is the art of sharing information in an attempt to persuade, to represent something in its most positive or negative light sometimes. And it's designed to create a more emotional than rational response. So in terms of its communication process, it is the same as marketing. What makes propaganda, I guess, different is typically the subject matter or the ideology more commonly that it's promoting. So we've seen recently, certainly over on this side of the pond, we had a couple of years ago, 4 years ago now, the big Brexit debate. And all of the information that was coming out wasn't thoughtful, detailed, deep information around a complex subject. It was take back control and flags being waved everywhere. And let's save the money we send the EU and fund the NHS instead, which sounds like it would be a nice thing. And that's what appeals to people. But once you look any further than beyond the headline, you realize that it's absolute nonsense, that there is no money to be saved. And that money that is being saved will not find its way into the health service and so on and so forth. So propaganda has become, I guess we think of it more in times of war. At least I do. I think of those posters, the Uncle Sam, wants you for the U.S. Army with the pointy finger. That sort of propaganda that drives a national effort towards in a war. And you'll see it on all sides of the conflict, right? The Germans in the Second World War would have had their version of propaganda. They actually had a ministry of propaganda to spread those words. So when we think of it in the dark side, we're really thinking about the message itself that's being promoted, puts propaganda on the dark side. And incidentally, propaganda only attained its negative sort of connotations this past century. Historically, it was just a matter of fact way of spreading something, of propagating something. It was the Catholic Church in the 17th century coined the word to promote and propagate the faith. So it's only become negative because it's been hijacked by these dark sides that want us to support or vote against our best interests. So to answer your question, Mary, it's not different. It's the message that counts, which really throws it back to us to think about what is it about good propaganda, and by good I mean it achieves its goal, that we can take back control and put into the hands of our marketers. What are those elements, do you think?
Tom, you want to take that one?
Well, I think it's the emotional appeal that propaganda exploits. And, that can be used for good. I think what propaganda is often light on is supporting logic. And I think in business, it's often said that emotion attracts and logic persuades. And so in most situations in business, if it's a higher involvement product, so I'm not talking about chewing gum or, a candy bar. I'm really talking about B2B purchases or higher ticket purchases. You need more than the emotional appeal. But if you don't have the emotional appeal to go along with the logic, you're probably at a deficit. So what I think the good marketer can learn from the dark side is how to use emotion and logic together to make a really powerful argument that both attracts and persuade, doesn't just attract.
I think that that's a really good point, because when you think about we work with so many engineers, and when they get excited about talking about how a turbine works and and they think that that's going to be the way they're going to sell it to the market, it is refreshing when the light bulb goes on for them and they go, oh yeah, I kind of need to make sure I'm appealing to the emotional side, or at least some of the other benefits beyond just how it functionally works. And so I think that, it is actually an interesting twist to think you've always have to have good propaganda in your marketing. And the other part of what I think Sean said was it was a mass distribution. The Catholics did it to spread faith. So the channels that propaganda uses, I think, is also very interesting. They did one-to-one marketing. Basically, they went out, the missionaries went out and talked to everyone face to face, and they had the orators in Greece that, when they were doing their propaganda, they were great at standing on rocks and telling people what to think. So I think the channels are in a very interesting way of thinking about way propaganda works too.
Hey, Mary, yeah, before we go to the channels thing, I do want something that you said reminded me of something that I also wanted to throw in the mix, because you started out talking about how engineers can get excited about turbines. But what I think is really interesting about B2B marketers is oftentimes they fall into the trap of saying, it's all about the logic. It's all about the rational mind. It's nothing about this emotional stuff is for consumer goods. And we did do a study in 2018 of the positioning statement taglines of the top 20 B2B marketers. Every single one of them surprisingly had an emotional appeal in their taglines, 20 for 20. And so I did want to just, before we started, I think the channels thing is a very interesting topic, but before we got onto that, I wanted to mention that because it's something that we've done recently that surprises the heck out of those engineers and maybe starts to get them to realize that they do need some elements of the propaganda approach to go along with the very logic that supports their products and services.
I think on that topic also, Tom, the other element that I think separates some of the worst aspects of propaganda from some of the best aspects of marketing messaging is how we treat the positives versus the negatives. You'll see quite often in propaganda that they'll try and scare or guilt people. They'll use negative emotions. There's a classic one from the First World War, what was known as the Great War at the time, obviously, because they didn't know we were going to have a sequel at that point. And that there was a picture of a sort of suburban dad sat with his kids, and the speech bubble from one of the kids was, "What did you do in the Great War, Daddy?" Just totally trying to guilt people into thinking I'm going to have to account for my actions at some point. In the Brexit debate, there was a post that had this queue line of people going off into the distance, essentially saying the country's full, mass immigration has to stop. I mean, none of it stood up to scrutiny, but it was a very powerful and negative image. And something we find with marketing is you have to use negative very judiciously. You can use negative as long as it's firmly wrapped up in a positive. You can show a little bit of risk as long as you're offering salvation or some sort of preventative measure. When you think of IBM, when they said no one ever got fired for hiring IBM, there's an implied fear of hiring the wrong contractor could cost you your job. But the main message is positive, like, hey, relax. This is IBM. We've got this. And it's an important differential, I think, that positive tends to sell better. But there is a place for the negative. It's just finding that balance. At least that's my experience. Do you agree?
Well, there's actually studies on that, where it's a curve, a response curve. And like if they said, this is your brain on drugs, it's kind of like there was no other, it's like, wow, I'm in trouble, but there was no solution provided to. Whereas, friends don't let friends drive drunk, so it has, to your point. So I guess I am agreeing with you, but it has a solution part of it too, so that you don't get screwed. It's like, oh man, that's a bummer. And, even I want you, and then it said, go to your local recruiting station. So there was you could do something about feeling guilty. So you have to have both sides of it, or people are like deer in the headlights and they just don't do anything.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the mix, doesn't it? I like the idea of this is your brain on drugs. I'm trying to think what my brain on drugs would be like. It would be like me wandering around at 3 a.m. looking for a 24-hour garage to buy some candy. I imagine. I have no knowledge of
Well, it
whether that
actually
would
was
be.
2 eggs being fried in a pan, and that was
Yeah,
the image.
I must have missed that. I was just playing. I was playing my own tape in my head then. Yeah, I think that's true, isn't it? That every positive is essentially representing a negative if it's unsaid or unstated. Like, be happy is positive, and of course, the implication, I guess, somewhat is don't be sad. So there's always that other side of the coin, and I think that's the key: is finding that little balance where you accentuate maybe the positive, but there has to be that underlying danger of some description. Even that friends don't let friends drive. It's a positive message. Friends, good people, don't let people do stupid things. The implication is if you do let them do stupid things, it's going to end in a world of hurt. So,
And that is, I think, the formula, right? Because I'm going to bring up one that has both elements. It has fear and hope. And this is apolitical, okay? But make America great again. There has been a politician that has been recently voted off the world stage, we think, as of this.
well, that was still disputed. Is that not sorted yet?
As of this, right? Again, the hopes are fading fast. But, think about that as probably one of the most effective appeals that we've seen in recent times, because it had both of those elements, right? There was a fear that, hey, this great country is slipping off the rails, and here's the positive: vote this person in, and you can make America great again. Got 72 million votes. Unfortunately, the opponent got 76 million votes, and the electoral college math worked out better for the opponent. But, we even wrote our only one of our few political articles ever about this back in the primaries. And we predicted that, of 2016, I should say, going way back, but we even predicted that Trump was going to win, not from our own personal political biases. We don't talk about those, but from the fact that his opponent, his Republican primary opponent at the time, did nothing to appeal to people's emotions. It was Jeb Bush, had a very terrible positioning. And we said, watch out, this positioning got Jeb kicked out of the race. And it's probably, unless somebody comes up with a better counter argument, is probably going to carry Trump to the White House, or at least to the primary victory, and which did lead to the White House. And it was just because of that brilliant combination of hope and fear in one message that no one else came up with an effective counter argument to it, at least in 2020.
I think when you look at that, it's a timely reminder, because when we're talking to people, particularly engineers and scientists that really don't like the fluffiness of some positioning messages of trying to accentuate this positive or try to engage an emotion, it seems alien somehow. But if ever you want an example of it working, because a lot of people, most people will say, slogans have no effect on me. I'm not swayed by advertising. Now, we know empirically that is just not true. We are all affected by that which we see and hear on a regular basis. And if ever you need to convince someone, and that's a really good point, regardless of your political hue, if you recognize that simple, powerful messages with hope wrapped around fear can drive people to act en masse, then that's a perfect example of it.
And I think that, to put in a plug for our book, I think in our book, our chapter on positioning, we talk a lot about, how you can be effective in that environment. We talk a lot about how, you have to be very aware of your competitor's positioning, because you cannot position on the same thing that a strong competitor has already effectively positioned on. It's very difficult. It's kind of trying to wedge your car into a parking spot that's already there. What we do in the book talk about a number of ways that you can, think about what's owned and unowned in the marketplace, and figure out how to find a spot, a positioning spot that is unowned and also powerfully reflective of what you can do well as a company. But it is something that requires, I think, more work than a lot of marketers put into it.
Yeah, it's a simple output, isn't it? The output is like, here's 3 words, and it took us, 1,000 words to get to those 3 words. It is a pretty big, long effort, but usually worth it if you can engage that spot in the customer's mind that resonates, that pings, if you like. Then it's worth the effort. Probably more so than bigger return than most other things you'll do in marketing. To be honest,
Yeah, it seems like propaganda also has, it is a very simple message. And, the phrase, the more you say, the less you say. And that's why I think the good side of propaganda is it's crisp and it gets right to the heart of the matter. And, that's to your point, what we work so hard to find those elements. So if you can turn propaganda into something that is, not going to destroy the world or a person, and it's actually, the background on it, there's actually tests on propaganda. Is it propaganda or not? And there's models to test if it really is propaganda based on who's paying for it and what the true motive is. So you can always put it through some filters too. So any closing thoughts, Tom?
My closing thought is that what you can learn from propaganda is that you need to build emotion into your B2B marketing and positioning. I think you probably have the logic there, and that's probably the world that you live in. But build emotion into it by finding the values that you're appealing to, but also that aren't already owned by your competitors. Be honest with yourself. What does the competition own? Find something that is open, that also, you can serve well in terms of appealing to a certain emotion. Combine that with your logic and you have a recipe for success.
Sean?
I'll leave us with the words of David Hume, an 18th century philosopher, who said, reason is a slave to the passions, meaning that our rationality is always subservient to our emotions. And if you remember that in any messaging you do, you won't go far wrong.
Wow. So we, of course, hope that you have thought about your world differently and maybe some of the propaganda that you are experiencing or that you might want to consider in some way. And you can hear all of our podcasts at the accidentalmarketer.com website, or really anywhere you can get your podcasts. And we would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you.